Great. Well, hi everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar, 2025 Legal Shifts and Preparing Your People Leaders Now. So really excited to welcome you on behalf of our team at Continu and our partners at Treliant. Today's session is focused on helping your people leaders navigate an increasingly complex compliance landscape. We'll discuss some key legal risks organizations are facing and how training combined with right technology can equip your managers to lead with confidence. We want today's session to be interactive and as useful as possible. So please feel free to submit your questions as we go in the chat, and we will have a live Q&A at the end as well. With that, I'll turn over to the Treliant team to introduce themselves and share a quick overview of the important work that they're doing in the compliance space.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elissa Rossi. I just had to unmute myself. I am the Vice President of Compliance Services at Treliant. We're a compliance company, and Bailey will give you a little more information about what we do at the company. So I'm a lawyer. Bailey is also a lawyer, and we have a number of lawyers in the company. And what we do is sort of keep the courses up to date, and we keep our clients aware of compliance and legal issues.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Bailey. I'm compliance counsel at Treliant. I've got a background in employment law and litigation. I've practiced at a couple law firms and graduated from Iowa State and Loyola University School of Law. All right, a little bit about Treliant. Like Elissa said, we are an online compliance training company. So we provide training for thousands of different employers. We have an in-house compliance team with legal expertise that includes Elissa and I. We have a colleague, John, that covers kind of like cybersecurity, AI-related laws. And beyond training, we also provide an HR policy and employee handbook service. So with that service, we help our clients create an entirely compliant employee handbook, and we keep that up to date on a monthly basis. So we review any changes in the law and make sure that your handbook stays compliant and up to date.
And I'm Terri. I'm the VP of product here at Continu. I've had the privilege of working at Continu for the last 13 years and 25 years in L&D. So I love to be able to work with our customers and really translate a lot of the problems that they're looking to solve with Continu. So yeah, with that, I will share a little bit about Continu. We are a learning management system. Our goal is to make your lives a little bit easier when it comes to training your people, both internal employees and external contractors and customers. We work with some really great brands. You probably see it on our website, but we work with a lot of teams that are looking to solve for both informal and formal learning, looking at compliance heavy training, making sure that people can complete their training on time. Teams like SoFi and US Foods and Instacart, all looking to solve for that problem that we have with training our people and keeping them engaged. So looking forward to sharing a little bit more as we get through the webinar today. But for the webinar overview, our goal is to really, spend some time looking at Treliant's employee law fundamentals courses. There's been a lot of shift in the last few months, and I think it's important for training managers to really understand the employment law fundamentals and how do we translate that for our people leaders, and how do we make them feel comfortable with all the shifts and the changes. And then, of course, we'll look about how you can actually leverage the right training in the Continu platform, and we'll close out with a bit of Q&A at the end. So looking forward to getting started and sharing a little bit more about Treliant's employee law fundamentals courses.
So we do a set of employment law fundamentals courses. Right now, there are 4 courses in the set, and these are really directed at managers to let them know what are sort of the key risks that managers have in things like hiring, in wage and hour, in accommodations, and in leave issues. Right now, I think it's particularly important that managers sort of understand their legal obligations. There is, right, so much uncertainty, so many sort of changes, and the changes are unclear. And it's really important to communicate to managers sort of what hasn't changed and what they still need to do to make sure that they don't sort of inadvertently make mistakes that can turn out to be very serious in terms of enforcement actions or civil suits. So this is a great set of 4 courses just to get a really good, solid baseline for managers to understand the law. So I'm going to talk about disability, pregnancy, and religious accommodations. This is a great course. It covers these 3 topics. I think a lot of managers are familiar with disability accommodations because they're fairly regular request. The course, I think, is useful because it really gives a good understanding, and it goes into some of the areas that it's really easy for a manager to make a mistake on, like sharing medical information, how to identify accommodation requests, and then about the requirements around the interactive process and what employers need to do in order to fulfill that obligation. Like all of our courses, we keep the accommodations course up to date with the law. Like when the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act came in, we added the pregnancy accommodation section, and that's sort of a growing area, both for requests from employees and also for claims related to, non-compliance.
All right. Another one of the courses in the Employment Law Fundamentals suite is the Interviewing and Hiring Lawfully course. This helps teach managers how to avoid unlawful and inappropriate questions or comments that they could potentially make during an interview. It teaches managers how to take proper notes during an interview, both so that they can, accurately and properly document the interview process, but also to make sure that they're not including anything in their notes that could potentially be problematic down the line if somebody has a claim for discrimination. It also teaches managers what they can and can't consider when selecting a candidate, which is really important. And a lot of it isn't always super obvious. So I think this training is important for that reason. And like Elissa said, and this goes for all of our courses, we keep them up to date with any changes in both federal and state law. All right, another one of our courses is Family, Medical, and Other Protected Leave. This teaches managers how to recognize potential FMLA leave requests and how to comply with that leave process. It also covers qualifying military exigencies under USERRA. These, again, are not super obvious or intuitive to managers if they don't have this training, so that's really helpful. Another kind of tricky subject that the training covers is how to track intermittent leave. And then it also covers any comparable state and local leave laws as well.
And the last of the 4 courses is Wage and Hour Fundamentals. So that course covers both the FLSA, and it also covers state and some local laws, like local laws relating to scheduling are included in the course. It's a really good course because, like Bailey was pointing out with the interviewing and the leave course, it points out some things that aren't particularly obvious. Like, for example, even if an employer says, you need to get approval to work overtime, if the employee doesn't get approval and they work overtime, they still need to be paid. So that is the 4th of the courses, and you can go to the next slide. So, this is yours, sorry.
I can go with this one. All right, so kind of to touch more on why you should train your managers on interviewing and hiring lawfully and the importance of this course. Hiring managers are usually the first line of contact with candidates. And so asking unlawful or inappropriate questions, even unintentionally, can lead to discrimination claims. And it can turn off candidates from working at your company as well. There's also increased scrutiny around discrimination in hiring under this new administration. So we want to make sure that your managers know how to handle interviews properly to avoid any kind of discrimination claims. It gives managers the knowledge to comply with different laws and state-specific regulations. Like I mentioned, it teaches managers how to properly document interviews. This is super important to ensure transparency and consistency during the hiring process. And again, like I said, it can protect against claims of discrimination. It also helps the organization avoid litigation, promote fairness and equity, improve hiring outcomes, and just overall build a more respectful and legally compliant workplace.
So for the accommodations course, the first thing I would want to point out is the religious accommodations content. So both the new head of the EEOC and the Trump administration have taken a very strong sort of stated policy position that they are going to sort of rigorously enforce religious freedom in the workplace. One of the areas that crops up in is a potential or a perceived conflict between gender identity protections and religious freedom at work. So I do expect that there will be enforcement actions by the EEOC, maybe other federal regulators as to that. And there are also increasing civil claims as to that. So what managers need to know and what the course teaches them is how to recognize a request for a religious accommodation, because there's no magic words. And so managers need to hear employee sort of concerns and complaints and be able to say, that's an accommodation request. I need to reach out to HR. Disability and pregnancy accommodations are also covered. Pregnancy particularly is interesting. The current EEOC chair believes that the prior interpretation of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which gives accommodations, is too broad, right? So the EEOC may be sort of narrowing that, like doing guidance or doing new regulations. On the state level though, and this goes across really all states, it's like both red states and blue states, pregnancy accommodations at the state level are they tend to be in almost every state. And they also tend to be fairly generous, right? So even if the federal protections get scaled back, managers do need to understand that those protections are still there, and those protections are included in our course. So for pregnancy accommodations, just because the other point to make is because they're fairly new, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act went in 2023. So not like if you have an experienced manager, they might be like very good on disability accommodations. They might have a lot of experience with it. And pregnancy accommodations are new, and religious accommodations, while they're not new, they are less common in the workplace. But now there is a very strong possibility that more employees are going to be seeking them. And so wage and hour. Wage and hour, I think, is getting less attention because of the administration's focus on discrimination, on DEI, on sort of those types of issues, which are like, Bailey and I are both employment lawyers, and to employment lawyers, those are like completely separate topics. But even though wage and hour isn't getting a ton of attention from the new administration, it is really still a huge source of potential risk for employers. And the reason why is state enforcement authorities really like wage and hour courses. They bring them frequently. It's something that you can get like a lot of political political attention, like favorable political attention for, because you're usually like recapturing unpaid wages. And it's also a very profitable area for plaintiffs' lawyers. So the people who are actually the ones approving the timesheets and sort of allowing people to work overtime or not work overtime, and checking whether employees should be paid for this break time or they don't need to be paid, those are really the employees who need to understand that, and that's the managers. The other thing to point out about wage and hour is, unlike discrimination claims, wage and hour is often like a collective claim. So if you have a manager who doesn't understand a particular part of the wage and hour laws, they are probably making that mistake across their entire team, right? So what will happen is all of those people have claims. They will bring a big claim all together, and obviously that is, greater financial and legal risk. Reputational damage with wage and hour is pretty severe, particularly if you're a more high profile company. Like, I think that the example I would point to is Amazon, right? Amazon has had a number of regulatory issues, but one of the issues they've had is underpayment. And it can really, really damage, your company's image in the public eye, but also hurt you on things like recruiting.
All right, so leave laws are another important thing to train your managers on, because these especially are ever changing. They're frequently misunderstood. They can be kind of complex, and like a lot of the other laws we've been talking about, they can carry some pretty significant legal risks if they're, mishandled. Again, managers are usually the first point of contact when an employee brings up a personal or family health issue. So it's really important that they understand, what to look out for. Similarly to accommodation requests, employees don't need to say, the exact words FMLA or USERRA to be able to trigger these protections and seek a request. So managers need to be able to recognize when these protected leave situations arise and know how to respond accordingly. Again, they need to be trained to recognize, when in conversation this kind of thing would come up. For example, I need time off to care for my mom, instead of saying, I need FMLA to care for my mom. That's not necessary. So again, we want to train managers on how to recognize these, because failure to recognize this can result in unlawful denials and then potentially retaliation claims as well.
Great. So I think we might have got a question. So maybe we'll pause if you want to. I think you're muted. All right, maybe we'll come back to that then. Yes, so thanks so much, Bailey and Elissa. I think just curious, the importance of training managers in employment law fundamentals is a big topic, and I know we've gone through it all. I mean, when we talk about the importance of training managers, what are some of the biggest legal risks organizations face when training is missed or is inconsistent?
I mean, there's several. So a big one, especially with the interviewing and hiring lawfully, is the risk of discrimination claims. Most managers, I would say, probably know not to mention the main protected characteristics or ask about them in interviews, but there are some that aren't necessarily super obvious. For example, one that we cover in the course is if you are seeking or giving priority to applicants that speak a particular language, let's say Spanish, you shouldn't be asking them whether they're part of a protected class, such as, you're not going to be asking them about their nationality or where they're from, things like that. You can instead ask if they speak Spanish or if they speak that language, but you want to avoid touching on those protected characteristics. So that's something that's not super obvious to a lot of managers that training can address. Elissa, do you want to touch on wage and hour?
Yeah, I think for all of the courses, there is the risk of enforcement or civil actions. And so you're sort of heading that off because you're making sure your managers or know the rules and aren't sort of like going into risky areas. Um, another benefit that training gives is if you do have an enforcement action or if you do have civil suits relating to a violation of law, if the employer can show that they took action, like they were interested, they made clear to their employees, it's important that we follow the law. Being able to show that you gave training can do that. And like that will matter sort of to an enforcement agency, but it will also matter if you're in just a civil litigation. Like, for example, under the FLSA, the standard sort of measure of damages, if you underpay your employees, is double, right? The employee gets the wages they weren't paid, and then that amount again, in order to sort of punish the employer for not originally paying wages properly. If a violation is found to be willful, like the employer willfully failed to pay wages, it's triple damages. So it is significantly more. And one way that you can show a judge or a regulator or a plaintiff's attorney that, while a manager or the company might have made a mistake, but it was sort of a one-off, it was a sort of an unusual situation, and it's not the way that the company practices, is you can show we train our managers and we are like trying to comply with the law here. We're not just disregarding it.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think from my perspective, especially in corporate learning, we often see like compliance training treated as a one-time event or a checkbox. But when it's done well, it does become part of a larger culture of accountability. And I think that helps managers feel more confident. It reduces escalations. It ultimately protects the business while supporting a better employee experience. And I think that's really where we see it doing well is when managers and, head of L&D really see it as a lot more than just a checkbox. And that's where we've seen a lot of successes over the years with the teams that we work with. So yeah, I appreciate that, Elissa and Bailey. So what we're going to do is we're going to, we've been chatting quite a bit, so we're going to turn it over to all of you for a quick poll. So what is your organisation's biggest concern regarding the 2025 legal shifts in employee law? Understanding how recent executive orders impact our DEI initiatives, ensuring leaders are properly trained on legal fundamentals, documenting compliance training completion for potential audits, managing increased employee scrutiny while minimizing legal exposure. And then the last one, maybe developing efficient systems to keep up with rapidly changing regulations. Or if none of those apply, feel free to add anything in the chat. So we'll give you some time to make your votes. And I think while everyone's voting, Elissa, Bailey, any thoughts on your side, where you think maybe the answers where we might get most of our answers?
I think a lot of our clients have had concerns and confusion about the recent executive orders and how those impact their compliance training. So I know that that's something that we've seen a lot of questions and curiosity about. So that would probably be my guess.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. That is definitely number one for this year.
Yeah, I think so as well. That's definitely part of a lot of conversations we're seeing at Continu, and I think the last one as well, developing efficient systems to help keep everyone up to date and making sure everybody gets the training, that they need.
Yeah.
So great. The poll results are in, and the top answer is developing efficient systems to keep up with rapidly changing regulations. And then the one that came in second is understanding how recent executive orders impact our DEI initiatives. I think that's been a hot topic over the last few months. So, but I think we've. What do you think? Why do you think that is, Elissa, Bailey? Any thoughts on those responses, or does it seem pretty accurate?
Yeah, I mean, definitely keeping up with regulations is right. It's something that HR professionals really struggle with, and I think given the amount of things that HR professionals are being asked to do within organizations, this is sort of something that is hugely time consuming, and it's something that at Treliant we try to provide. Like Bailey does the handbook service, and that service makes sure that, like, if a state puts in a new leave law, you know that that happened and you have proper policies for it. So yeah, makes sense.
Great. So, on how do we take, leverage the right training, in Continue? I think that is something that, we work very closely with Client on the courses and making sure, like, as they've shared, like everything that they want to, they want to provide to your managers. But how do you actually solve that in a platform? And in Continue, we always try to start with making it as easy as possible, both from the learner's perspective and both from an admin perspective. I think that the biggest feedback we've received over the last few years is that, it's hard enough to get people to actually take compliance training. That's always the hard thing of it all, is to get them to actually get into a platform and start. Once you get them there, how do you actually get them to complete their training on time? That's the next big thing, because we all know with compliance training there's a level of requirement and due dates and everything that goes into that. So at Continue, we really try to make compliance training and training in general feel exciting, feel like something that you want to do, so that it doesn't make it so that it's very difficult for your admins every day to get started. So what we like to do, and we know that the biggest thing that we try to solve for when it comes to compliance training, is making sure that you can reduce that admin burden, and of course automate. So a big piece of that is our assignments functionality, the ability for you to not only assign learning, but to target the right groups. Because we know that we've been talking a lot about people leaders, and that's really what we need to be training on, because they're the ones who are managing teams and navigating a very shifting landscape right now. But how do we get the right content to them at the right time? And that's where our smart segmentation comes into play. So not only can you segment content to the right people at the right time, but you can make sure that you can personalize notifications and updates. And that's where we actually feel that a lot of this is actually driven by that on-time completion. Because if people get a customized notification, we can loop in managers in the process. We can bring in any other contacts, maybe the legal team, maybe the HR team. We find that people will complete their training on time. We find generally we get a good 80 to 90% on-time completion in Continue, and on a compliance standpoint, that's big numbers, because I think that's really where we find a lot of the teams struggling to get people to complete their training on time. So assignments and automating it, because as you can imagine, you don't just do that training once, you have to do it annually, you have to do it quarterly, and being able to automate is a big piece of that. And then of course, once you've actually got the training, you've assigned it out, how do we measure that? So with Continue Insights, we look to make this a little bit more of a less of a burden, so that you can get the right information at the right time. You can share it with executive leaders, you can share it with your legal, your HR team, and we want that data to feel a bit more of a conversation, so that you can come into the system. You don't need to be a data analyst. You don't need to have an outside BI tool. You can use Continue Insights to actually help you drive those results when you need them. So, of course, the biggest piece of not just assigning training is being able to measure the outcomes of that. Are people completing their training on time? How is managers using that training to help their direct reports and their teams? And that's how we actually can take those measurable results and actually use them over time, and really be able to create some scalable results as well. So yeah, that is how we try to drive that. And the great thing is that all of your client content is lives and continues, to make it even easier for you to manage as well. So that's really what we try to do: bridge that gap between the training, make it very easy for your admins to get it up and running, and then of course make sure that your learners actually complete on time, because that's the biggest pain point when you're actually managing training in an LMS. So yeah, we'll turn it over to all of you. If you have any Q&A for us, you have any questions that we can help answer, we would love to be able to provide additional support. Great. So frequently, what we really see with a lot of the questions that we get. So, what are some examples? What are some examples of questions that might seem harmless during an interview, but could actually create legal risk for a company? I think that's something that we go into a lot when we're hiring and we're managers and looking to build our team. So, Elissa, Bailey, any thoughts on your side?
Yeah, one that I touched on briefly that we also cover in the course is so the way that our course is structured is it starts off with a scenario of an interview. So you go through and you watch this hiring manager do an entire interview, and he asks several questions that should raise red flags for managers. And then we go through why some of those questions were inappropriate or unlawful. But one of those questions is the manager mentions that they are giving priority to applicants that speak Spanish. But rather than just state that, he asks this interviewee how or where they're from. You know, I think he asks them if they're Hispanic or if they were born in Argentina and if that's why they speak Spanish. So that's an example of a question that, you know, it has harmless intent, but it definitely creates a legal risk. Another one that's covered in the training is touches on the topic of religion. So the hiring manager sees that the candidate is wearing a cross necklace and starts to talk to her about, you know, religion and the religion of some of his coworkers as well. That's another one that might seem harmless. He just wanted to make some small talk, but it's definitely not appropriate or lawful for interview questions. Any others you can think of, Elissa?
Yeah, I mean, I think one other area is sort of family, spouse, stuff like that, because that, like you just said about small talk, that can be sort of a very easy thing to slip into if you're talking about you just went on vacation or it was just the holidays and who were you with, and that can get into just risky areas where the person doing the interview shouldn't really know the marital status or the family status of the person being interviewed.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and how often should employees train managers on recognizing and responding to accommodation requests given the evolving legal landscape? I think that's been a hot topic at Continu as well.
Yes. So generally, I think doing training, like you don't need, generally, before the big changes we're seeing now, my opinion was you didn't need to do it every year because managers aren't like assessing the accommodations requests. They need to be able to recognize them and then flag them to HR. And so that isn't, you know, that managers can remember year to year. Now, though, because of all the changes, I do think it's more important to keep them updated. And so that's one of the things we try to do in our courses, where we release a new course every year. And where there are changes in the law, we'll sort of highlight those so that the managers know sort of don't do this anymore, or this aspect changed, or there's a new sort of type of accommodation, or there's a new accommodation risk that you need to be aware of. So for right now, I would say, you know, more often is better.
Making sure everyone's very prepared. Yeah, so they don't feel as if they don't have the right answers, especially on those interviews, and making sure that everybody has what they need. Yeah, I appreciate that. Do we have any more frequently asked questions there? I think, yeah, if a manager is unsure whether a request qualifies as religious or disability accommodation, what should there be their first action? I think it goes back to Bailey's, you know, interview question earlier there. So what would your thoughts be there?
Yeah, so if you're unsure about any kind of an accommodation issue and sort of what even like what can be accommodated, what can't be accommodated. Like for example, these might be less frequent now, but COVID accommodations were a big issue for a long time. So always reach out to HR just to check. And one of the things, like it's not an explicit sort of point made in our courses, but a manager who takes the 4 employment law fundamentals course will have a very solid understanding of sort of where legal rights might be implicated in sort of common workplace situations. The employee is ill, the employee's family member is ill, the employee has a religious event that they need to go to, the employee has life circumstances changing, pregnancy. That's what sort of you want your managers to have, like a good working knowledge, so they can say, you know what, I bet you there's like a legal implication here. I bet you there's a compliance aspect to this. And so I'm going to pick up the phone and check with HR.
Yeah, and I think, how can organizations support managers in spotting and avoiding wage and hourly mistakes before they become costly? I think that's pretty timely as well.
Bailey, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. This is maybe kind of an obvious answer, but training employees on this topic, particularly with our wage and hour course, is great. But one way that the course kind of makes the material more digestible and easier to learn is we try to gamify our courses as much as possible. So one really cool thing about the wage and hour course is it includes a timesheet kind of game, like interactive game, where instead of sitting through a half hour, however long it is, of like PowerPoint presentation slides, employees have the opportunity to interact with the material more. So in this timesheet game, they're given a scenario of, an employee on their team that worked these hours, and this is what their timesheet looks like. Is it accurate? So that can help managers kind of digest this information a little more easily. So beyond just training, making sure that your training is interactive and easy for managers to understand and digest, rather than just throwing a bunch of information at them, because wage and hour law isn't the most riveting topic.
No, it's right, Bailey. We hear that a lot, especially on the compliance training, is to get the learners to be engaged. And I think having that interaction has been is a good way of doing that, especially because those courses can be long and it keeps them motivated. We did get a question just as we were chatting through some of the frequently asked that we have. It seems like current hiring laws are in conflict of where law is going. Law moves slowly where public opinion is a lot quicker. Is there a general rule of thumb with the rapid change?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think the issue of the law versus public opinion, because one of the main issues with the executive orders is that they've created a lot of confusion, right? They created confusion for employers. What do we need to do? Is this something we actually have to comply with? But it's also created confusion for employees, right? Like we get questions from learners who take our courses, and we've gotten questions from learners who think that the executive orders actually changed the law, and they didn't. So we're not talking about this course today, but we do have a new course that is directed for managers, and that talks about exactly what the executive orders say and what they don't say. And it points out the places where managers need to be aware that the law is still in place. So they shouldn't sort of, like, for example, there is an executive order establishing English as the official language of the United States. That has no impact on speaking English in the workplace, right? And we have gotten questions from learners saying, why are you covering English only rules, which in the US are allowed only in very limited circumstances? Why are you covering English only rules in your course because English is the official language, so employees have to speak English. And that's not correct. So that's like something that managers need to know. So I think it's a matter of educating your managers on sort of, in this circumstance, that basically the law has not changed. And with respect to the outside perception, I think it's important, like, depending on what the organization, right? If your organization is truly committed to diversity and you see the actual financial benefits of it, then you can make a corporate statement, but you can do diversity. You can have a very, effective diversity program and not violate any anti-discrimination laws. So, sort of companies taking stock of where they want to be and then going out to the market and sort of saying, this is the approach we're taking. As long as you're compliant, then that's the way I think organizations should handle it.
Yeah, I think it goes back to Bailey's point about, just to keep educating, just to, yeah. And I think that's what will help with the shifting and the shifts that we've seen and the changes that happen, just to be, have the managers as educated as they possibly can be, maybe do those refresher courses as well. That's where we see, you can, maybe there is that requirement yearly that you need to do your training or even quarterly, but we are seeing a lot of our teams doing refresher training, just because they are finding that they still have a lot of questions, and you can always do refresher training. It's not a problem. And it will help with those conversations as well. So what we'll do is we'll do one more question while we still have the time. I know everyone's pretty busy today. I guess, if a manager isn't sure whether a situation qualifies for protective leave, what should they do first?
This is kind of similar to that accommodations question that Elissa just answered, and the answer is similar as well. The training directs managers to go to HR if there's any sort of confusion. So really it trains managers on how to notice when certain requests come up. They don't need to be absolutely sure, which type of leave this employee qualifies for, whether they do or don't actually qualify for it, but they just need to be able to notice those kind of flags go up and then direct that request to HR. So that's kind of the blanket answer is if a manager is unsure, take the situation straight to HR.
Yeah, no, I think that is a good approach there. Well, thanks again to everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate it. Big thank you to the Treliant team for sharing their insights and expertise. We hope today's session gave you some practical takeaways to help your people leaders stay confident and compliant in the face of the changing legal expectations. If you have any follow-up questions or want to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to either the Continu or Treliant teams. We're always happy to help. We'll be sharing the recording and a slide deck with all the registrations shortly, so keep an eye out in your inbox. And thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.